In this tutorial, we're going to combine all of the pieces of our phone into one group, ready for rendering. So you may have made the logo and text for the back of the phone in the same scene as the rest of your phone, or you may have made them in a different scene entirely. If you've made them in a different scene, like I need to import my screw that I've modeled earlier to go in the bottom of the phone, here's how you can import geometry from one scene into another. If you know that the other scene you'd like to import only has one object in, the one you want to import, then you can go File, Import, and you can immediately choose your scene to import. So I can see here that I've got a screw that I've modeled earlier, and you can hit Import. And the screw will appear in the scene. It will appear relative to the middle of the scene as it would have been in its original file. So here it was obviously made in the middle of its own scene, and it's imported to the middle of my scene here through the middle of the geometry, so I can move it out of the way like this. If, however, you've made an object as part of quite a busy scene and you only want to import one object from another scene into another, then you can do this. If I delete this temporarily to demonstrate, and you'll have to save the scene that you're currently in, open up the scene with the object you'd like to import, and let's pretend that there's loads of other objects in this scene. You could just literally drag select the object or objects you want to bring into your other Maya scene and do Control-C on the keyboard or Command-C if you're on a Mac, and copy it, and then reopen your scene that you were just in. It should be in recent files. You don't need to save it, and if you do Control-V or Command-V on a Mac, it will paste in again as if we had imported it. So this is a great way of importing geometry from one scene to another. It will also copy and paste the materials as well. So if I go to my hypershade, you can see here that it will come in as a copy. So I've got to clean up this hypershader here. There's quite a lot of copies and things going on, but you can see here it comes in as pasted AI standard surface 1, which is obviously what this screw has on it. So if I do select objects with material, you can see that that's being selected. So there seems to be a bit of a glitch in Maya 2019. When you import or copy and paste geometry, sometimes things can go a bit weird with when you try and move them around or something. If that ever happens to you, then you can just do delete history and then go to modify, freeze transformations, and it usually fixes it. If it doesn't, you might need to just create a random cube nearby, combine them together, and then hit separate again. As crazy as that sounds, that actually fixes a lot of problems if you've got weird moving issues and it sort of moves weirdly relative to the pivot. So once you've brought all the pieces of your phone together into one scene, we can start to assemble it. So you need to scale the SVG logo down and the iPhone text down from when you've made them, and very carefully put them onto the middle of your phone. So I'm going to just drag that down and allow it to intersect all the way down there. This logo is far too thick, and I'd be worried that it might even start showing through the front of the phone or something weird. So once you've put this through like that, you can go underneath or even spacebar to one of your side views and simply go to vertex mode and very carefully drag select all the vertices at the bottom like this, and you can just drag them up to there so it's very narrow piece of geometry like that. That'd be fine. Also, to save poly count, you could delete the faces at the bottom. The easiest way to do this would be to go to face mode, double click on, let's say, this loop of faces here. So if I turn my default materials on so you can see this easy, if I go to face mode, I'm going to do click, shift, double click next door, and then hit delete on the keyboard. That's now deleted. If I turn off my default material, that's now deleted that loop of faces. That allows me then to double click on the remaining geometry and hit delete because it's become separate from the rest of the logo. Same with this, shift, double click next door, delete the whole loop of faces, double click on the remaining faces, hit delete. That saves the poly count on there. I can do something similar with the text. So I could, if I want, angle my camera very carefully like this, drag select along like that, and then hold shift and drag select through. It's usually quite dangerous to do that because of perspective, and it might be safer to do that from one of your side views like this. So you can just drag select, hold shift, and deselect the ones you don't want it to delete, and then simply hit delete on the keyboard. And again, you can flatten those vertices out, just drag select them from your side view, and you can move them up until you're happy. Then go to object mode and drag your text down into the phone. I've got screen space ambient occlusion here turned on. I find this really helps me gauge where the contact shadows are. So when I'm bringing geometry down to intersect, I can sort of see the shadows appearing, which is quite handy. Of course, if you had proper lighting in your scene, you could turn shadows on and really see how far away things are from each other. So we want this kind of really, really close to the surface of the phone, like that. If this was for a real client, I'd probably texture these on the back with a diffuse, normal and specular map, but that might be quite a lot for a beginner tutorial, and I'll show you how to use textures for the screen of the phone anyway. I mainly wanted you to be exposed to bringing in SVG files and using text so that I could show you as many modeling techniques as possible in a single product tutorial. So these are fine for now, just sort of stuck on there like that. So now for the screw, just like with the Apple logo and the iPhone text, I need to check that there's nothing I can do to reduce the poly count on this on faces that we can't see. I did forget in the tutorial that I made for it to hide the inside faces of the spiral. So I'm going to click on the screw that I've made. I'm going to hit separate on my shelf. That's mesh separate if it isn't on your shelf, and you can then click on the helix on its own, and you can see here the faces that are on the outside of it. If I was to click isolate select, so this button here with the dotted blue line is isolate select, this will hide everything else temporarily, and you can see if I just kind of toggle that on and off quite quickly, I can see there's lots of faces on the inside that I don't need. If I bring up my poly count quickly, which is display, heads up display, poly count, and I can see how many faces that we're about to solve. So this helix at the moment has 4,800 faces, and I can see from before we're never going to see this one here. So I can do shift, double click next door and hit delete. Click on a face, shift, double click next door, hit delete, and shift, double click next door and hit delete. I don't think we're ever going to see those ones or these ones here. And if I turn off isolate select now by clicking on this icon again to toggle it off, you can see that's a lot better there as well. You could even remove this edge here, as it doesn't seem to inform the shape in any useful way. So if you wanted to delete a whole edge loop, you can double click on the edge loop and do shift, right click, delete edge, and at the bottom as well, double click, shift, right click, delete edge. Now this object is made up of only 1,200 faces, which is a lot more efficient. Let's combine all this back together again. So I'm going to go to object mode, drag select the entire screw, go to mesh, combine, and you may need to hit center pivot depending what version of Maya you're using. In 2019, the pivot does go back to the center of the group after you've combined it. You can now move the screw to the bottom of the phone and we can start to place it. Now these two holes next to the charging port, if I hit one on the keyboard, are a little bit too small for what we need, so I'm going to scale them up equally. So this might cause a problem in a minute, so I'm going to need to enable symmetry. Now to make sure symmetry is working perfectly, I need to have a line down the middle of the geometry. I'm going to isolate select this geometry by clicking on this isolate select button here, and I'm going to delete this random edge loop here. That's double click, shift right click, delete edge, because I want to place an edge loop exactly in the middle at the bottom. So I'm going to double click on my edge loop tool, choose multiple edge loops but only choose one, close this. If you can't see your edge loop tool on your shelf, go to mesh tools, insert edge loop, and click on the options box there if you need to and choose one multiple edge loops. Now you can get your edge loop and place it through exactly in the middle. As you try and drag it through on one of the horizontal blue lines, if I turn this off a minute, you can see they won't let you drag it. It will force the line to go exactly through the center. And I'm going to do the same at the top as well. So with the edge loop tool set to multiple edge loops 1, I'm going to drag at the top of the phone. You can see it only lets you to place it exactly halfway through. I'm now going to enable symmetry. So if you click on your hammer and cube icon at the top, or you can do it up here as well. So I'll go to symmetry, and I'm going to choose object X because I can see the X axis is down here at that angle. Now for test this, I'll go to face mode and see if it's working. It isn't working. It seems to be on some weird axis over here. It seems to be on an axis around the center of the grid as opposed to the center of the object, even though I've chosen the object. So symmetry can be a bit weird. So to fix this, instead of using object X for symmetry, this is what I would use if I was modeling a brand new object, by the way. But for an existing object that we've made early, choose symmetry to be topology. It will then come up with a message saying select mesh edge for symmetry. In other words, it's asking for you to double click on an edge that signifies the middle of your geometry. So if I choose this new edge that I made and double click on this one, now immediately it's set up symmetry. So if you go to face mode, you can see as you move your mouse over one side of the faces on the phone, the other side is also being selected. So because we mirrored this geometry earlier as well, it's pretty clean and it knows what to do. So all we've got to do now is increase the size of one of these holes here where the screw will go in. So I'm going to click on this face here, hit F to focus on it, double click next door to select the whole loop of faces. And I'm going to resize, and sorry, I'm going to hold shift inside and double click as well. So I've selected all of these faces. If you had a problem with that, you could actually, to make it easier, click on the inside, shift, double click next door. And if you want to on the keyboard, you can do shift, full stop, and that will grow your selection as well. Note that both of them have been selected. And if I do R for resize and resize the one on the left, the one on the right should also resize. Now it's important to know the difference between using the cube in the middle when you're resizing. If you use the cube in the middle, it will resize like this, which is really annoying. If you use the blue plane up here, or whatever plane your angle is at, I'm going to use a blue plane, it will resize without affecting the overall silhouette of the geometry, which is really nice. You could even turn on transform constraint and do surface slide, which means the holes won't affect the geometry silhouette even more. So I might do that. So if I just increase these ever so slightly, the outer sort of holes don't have a huge effect on distorting them, so that's a bit better. So I make them about that big, and the ones in the middle, I am now going to turn off transform constraint. So the outside ones had transform constraint on, which is really useful, which means the circle bends around the curvature of the phone, and the inside one I don't need to worry as much because it's set in a bit. I'll just use the plane up here to resize that in, and I might just do W for move and bring it backwards a little bit like that, so that the angle on the inside is about 45-degree angle going into the phone. Now I'm going to turn off my default materials, and if you hit 3 on the keyboard, you can see I want to tighten up the edges on all of these circles though, because they look a little bit inflated and melty at the moment. To do that, I can throw in some more edge loops. So forget my edge loop tool, and I'm going to just double click on it to use multiple edge loops. 1, and if you don't have the edge loop on your shelf still, make sure you've added it with mesh tools, insert edge loop, hold Control Shift, add it to your shelf, and you can double click on it really easily in there. And I'm going to go in now, and if I hit 1 on the keyboard, it's a lot clearer. And if I put an edge loop in the middle of that bevel like that, when I hit 3, it will be a lot sharper than it was before. So if you compare the sharpness of that hole with the one next door, you can see this one's a bit more inflated and that one just looks a bit sharper. So you can go through now and put on all your edge loops. You can put edge loops in smooth preview mode with 3 hit on the keyboard, but it's hard to see the edges you actually need to click on, and you might make some mistakes. So you might need to toggle between 1 and 3 quite a lot for this. So I'm just going to throw some edge loops in the middle of these guys, and the more edge loops you have on the corners of stuff, the sharper those corners will be. Good, because we had symmetry on, it's done it over there for us as well. If I hit 3 now and turn on my normal materials, I can see these holes are now a lot sharper, it looks a lot better. I might just do the same for this one in the middle as well. And on the inside, I could probably smooth this out as well by putting an edge loop in here. So now I want to choose where the edge loops go. So I'll double click on my edge loop tool, choose relative distance from edge. I'll drag one in quite close this way and one quite close in towards the back. Now I want to smooth this out, it's a lot sharper. Also, I can see the charging port, it still looks a little bit inflated like that, or a bit rounded. So if I get my edge loop tool, this time I'm going to do multiple, but just 1. And if I drag 1 exactly halfway there, 1 exactly halfway there, go to my selection tool and shift, double click on the first one that I made, do R for resize. With them both selected, I can drag them over there. Now if I hit 3, you'll see the effect this has. So before, it was quite rounded like this, and as I drag these out to the right, it becomes sharper and perfectly flat at the top and bottom. Be very careful not to edit geometry in smooth preview mode or in 3 mode, because you might accidentally sort of go through geometry like this and start to wonder why it's going weird. But when you hit 1, you realize you actually moved the edge really far through the next edge loop. So you can just do this and everything will be fine. So now we're ready to put the rest of the screws in. So if I come out of my isolate select mode with this isolate select, get the screw, rotate it around, I'll hit E on the keyboard, I'm going to hold down J on the keyboard now, and while holding J, I'll choose this vertical yellow line and move my mouse to the right. Try not to move your mouse with the curvature of the sphere, it doesn't really work, but if you move your mouse to the right, it goes to like a 90-degree angle. Or if you want to go to your channel box, and for rotate X, type in 90 degrees, it will go that way. And then you can resize this down. The screw is probably way more detailed than it needs to be for something so small at the bottom of your phone, but it's fine. So with the resize tool, if you hit D on the keyboard, that's D for delta, you can move the anchor point to the front of the screw like this. which makes it easier when resizing it. So I've hit D, I've moved the anchor point, I'll hit D again to come out of the move anchor point mode, and I can then move this screw. And when I resize it, it won't sort of fall back inside the hole, it will be absolutely fine. And I'll just angle that as best as I can to there. You could go to your front view or something to see this work better. And let's say that's fine. And I rotate it at a random angle as well, just because nothing's ever perfect in life. And duplicate that again. Now, when you duplicate something that you've rotated at a weird angle, it might get really annoying to move this. And you could use the green square, I suppose. But you could also double click on the move tool and choose axis orientation and change it to world. And that forces the move tool to stay at the angle the world's at, not the angle that you've rotated it to. And you can just sort of spin that around slightly so it's not quite right. And now we're going to do the gold contact at the bottom of the charging port here. The easiest way to do that is get a cube. I was going to drag a rectangle out on the grid like that, and you have to make sure that interactive creation was on for that to work in your create polygon primitives menu, and you can resize this down like this. In fact, before we do that, I'm just going to delete the faces at the bottom and hit delete and pop that back inside there. I'm going to bevel this and apply a material. So let's put the material on first. I'm going to do right click, assign new material. I'm going to assign an Arnold shader, an AI standard surface. I'm going to go over to my tab in the attribute editor called AI standard surface with the biggest number. That's quite a lot there. And I'm going to rename this to gold and hit enter, and go to presets and go to gold and hit replace. That goes gold. It doesn't look very shiny at the moment because it's not beveled. So let's go to the bevel tool up here. If it's not on your shelf, go to edit mesh bevel, and you can increase or decrease the fraction. So I'm going to put the fraction really, really quite small, like 0.1 with probably 2 segments. Maybe 3 might be overkill, but it's fine. And then you can sort of intersect that down a bit into the phone. So the iPhone charging port at the bottom has 8 gold contacts, which we need to space out as evenly as possible. We could use a duplicate special command and work out how many units to duplicate them across, but it'll take quite a while. The easiest way to do this is if you know exactly how many you need along an object, you can just put in that number of edge loops manually and it will just work. So if I remove the center edge loop from here and do shift, right click, delete edge, so that now I can say to I'd like to put in 8 edge loops equally spaced in here, and it's the fastest way of getting sort of like a fake ruler or a guide as to how many or where to place these gold contacts. So I double click on my edge loop tool up here. I go to multiple edge loops. This time I'm going to say I want 8, and I'm just going to use them as like a measuring device really. And as soon as you choose 8 and click in there, it does put 8 in. I'm going to come out of my edge loop tool by clicking on the mouse up here or hitting Q. And I can now sort this out. I'd like to see my wireframe on my geometry. So I'll click on my wireframe view up here and make sure that you are in 1 or hard edge mode on your geometry to hit 1 of the keyboard so it's not smoothed. And click on your new gold contact, and you may need to thin it out. Do not resize it because that will distort the bevels. But if you go to the vertex mode, you can drag select these and move them to the left. So it's fairly narrow like that. And just try and get that in the middle. If you really want it to be perfect, you could go back to your edge loop tool, choose 1, and just pop that down the middle as a guide to help you as well. So then you can do center pivot, W for move, and then you can do Control D, move that so it lines up with the next loop. You can shift select the previous one as well, Control D, and move those to there. And now I can shift select the first 4 and do Control D and move them over to there. So that's the quickest way of making 8 equally spaced gold contacts on the bottom of the phone. And you can put these along the top as well. It's going to get quite heavy on the poly count, but it's fine. Do Control D for duplicate, move them up to the top, and we can rotate this around. I'm not going to bother grouping them, so I'm going to hold J, make sure I orientate my camera so I can see this vertical line. I'm going to hold J and just rotate them around by 180 degrees. Do W for move, and again, just pop those up like that. I can now combine these together if I really want, and it's completely optional, but if you want to then remove these edges, you can just double click to remove them. It really doesn't matter. And after you've double click and selected all of those edges, you can do shift, right click, delete edge, and let's do the same for here as well because we don't need these anymore. I might leave the middle one there for a laugh in case we need symmetry. Shift, right click, delete edge. And we've sort of reduced the poly count slightly there as well. And that's everything modeled for our phone. We're now ready to group it, ready for rendering. So I'm going to turn off my image planes. I don't really need them anymore. So I'm going to go to my layer editor channel box up here, or the vertical text that says channel box layer editor. And I have my image planes assigned to a layer. If you don't, you can drag select all 3 of your image planes. So you can see them selected like that. And you can simply click this option here, which is create a new layer with the geometry on it. And then you can turn that layer off like this by hitting the V icon and it will go away. I've named mine image planes. To rename one of these, right click and choose the top option to rename it. So you can't use spaces. And now we've got our phone geometry here. So I'm going to have some groups set up for this. So let's say that I'm never ever going to need to separate these from there again, really. So I can click on all of this geometry and I could hit combine like this. So now it's almost like welded together permanently. You could go to mesh separate, but it sort of resets all the pivots and can get quite annoying. But it means that when we click away and click on it again, it is all selected, which is great. After combining, you sometimes need to do center pivot. That's modify center pivot, but you should be fine. And for the bottom of the phone as well, we're probably never going to need to remove anything from down here. So you could drag select and combine these. So you can drag select all these and hit combine. And that leaves us here with the screen. So this should be quite easy to set up now. I'm going to lift the phone up above the floor, get the back of the phone. I'm going to rotate it by 180 degrees by holding J, or I could type in 180 into my rotate Z option there. And I can then neatly place the back face underneath. I'm now going upside down under the phone to line this up neatly like that. If you hit 3 on all of your geometry to see how it looks, it should look quite good. If you want to turn off these blue lines, the option is here, turn those off. So we can see here one of the problems with combining geometry. Because I hit 3 and my text at the back wasn't properly quadrangulated, we've got this problem. So I need to leave the text unsmoothed for this to work properly. So I'm going to have to separate that. And I'm going to recombine all of these ones up here. So I've made a bit of a mistake here now. So I have to kind of drag select all of these guys. And then make sure I haven't selected anything on the top like this. So I'm going to hold shift and say, no, not you. These guys can be combined, but this text, because I haven't sorted it out properly, I can combine that on its own. And I might even combine it with the apple shape as well. And so I know now that I cannot have this smooth. So that's going to be as a separate thing. I can see here at the back that the phone screen isn't quite aligned properly, so I'll just fix that and that should be okay. Great, so I can hit 3 on the rest of my geometry, but not on the back. And sometimes when you combine and separate geometry, you get this problem where it forgets what materials have been assigned to something. So I can see on the little spheres inside the cameras here, it's lost the material. This might have just happened to you. So I need to kind of put my camera really closely inside and look like right the way through and click on this geometry here and do right click. It's going to start in a new material, put an Arnold shader, standard surface, and just choose a rubber or very dark rubber material that isn't shiny at all for now. And that should be okay. Okay, so back to the top, let's group this. So you can drag select the entire phone and do Control or Command G for group. The whole phone will go green. Once you've grouped an object, you will need to center the pivot. So if I try and move the object after hitting Control G, you can see the pivot's at the bottom of the scene, very far away from it. So hit CP for center pivot or modify center pivot. And it still hasn't centered the pivot. There must be some weird problem here. So I can manually move that up by hitting D, and that's better now. And then if you click away from your group and click on the group again, you'll see it doesn't get selected. So you can hit the up arrow on the keyboard for that to be reselected, or you can go to Windows, Outliner, and check in your outliner for your stuff. So we now need to clean up the outliner because it's all going to get a bit messy for when we come to render this. So let's delete our history. That's edit, delete all by type history. Then you can check your outliner again. It might be a good idea to put your outliner on your shelf. So I'm going to Control Shift that to my shelf. And I've got a lot of empty groups in our outliner here, so we can get rid of those quickly. So we've got things here to do with the screw And also there's lots of these empty groups that we can get rid of. So I'm just going to I know they're empty because if I click on them, nothing is selected. Nothing's going green in the scene. If I hit 4 on the keyboard, nothing's going green, except for if I click on my geometry, I can see here this group 4 is a really important one. So click on my geometry, hit the up arrow. You can see group 4 is highlighted. I'm just going to rename group 4. Sorry, double click on group 4 and I'm going to call it phone. Everything else that is a group can be deleted. I don't need this extra sky dome light and I don't need all of these extra groups. Keep one of your sky dome lights. I accidentally imported the other one. So I'm doing them one by one because I'm just checking that nothing in the scene is going to go green, showing me that actually I really need that piece of geometry or something. I seem to have 2 sky dome lights as well, so I'm going to delete the one that says screw. That's obviously from this screws scene. And this is a nice clean scene now where I've just got my phone and that's all I need. I'm going to hit 5 on the keyboard, 6 and then 7 to show all my lights and stuff. And so I can now move the entire phone. If I go to my channel box layer editor, close my outliner, you can see everything set to 0s and 1 there. And if I rotate the phone around like this, I can put it at any angle I want. And if later on I need to do some more editing, I can just change these numbers back to 0s. And I know that it'll be perfectly flat again, so that's good. Before we rotate the phone though, I do need to duplicate the screen to put underneath. We need to put some graphics on the screen in the next video, so I'm going to duplicate the screen, Control or Command D, and I'm going to move it underneath a bit. So if I hit 4 on the keyboard to show you this, I am just going to move the new screen underneath the phone slightly. Now this is going to be hard to click on later on, so I'm going to go back to my outliner, and I go into my phone group with the plus button here, and I'd like to rename this piece of geometry so that I can find it easily later on because it's going to be hidden by the top screen. So if I double click, I'm going to call this screen LED as in the actual screen. If you want to rename everything else you could, so I could double click on this one. This is called back panel. This one appears to be the side. This one appears to be the graphics logo, and this one appears to be the top glass. And so everything's neatly named so I can click on it easily later on, even though if I hit 5, 6, 7, things might be hidden. We're now ready to start to render this because we've got it all set up and organized. So final checks, I'm looking at the top of the phone and I can see through the edges of this phone here, so I need to fix that. So I'm going to go to my top view, that spacebar to my top view, close the outliner, and I'm going to fix this by going to vertex mode, zooming out a bit, drag selecting both of these vertices, and I'm going to zoom in so I can see them clearly. If I want to move the pivot up there so I can sort of really be accurate with this, I can hit D on the keyboard, move the pivot up to the corner, hit D again to toggle it out of that, zoom in, and now I can see the pivot whilst zoomed in, and now I can move these to the phone like that. I could even turn on wireframe unshaded like this so that these edge loops line up neatly, and that's now neatly aligned. I could see that underneath it some things were not neatly aligned, so I'm actually going to hide this piece of geometry with H on the keyboard. So when hiding geometry, it's usually a good idea to have your outliner on as well, and if you hit H you can see that whatever's hidden will go grey. To bring it back you can do Shift H to unhide it. So that's H to hide an object, Shift H to unhide it. So I'm going to click on my screen because that's aligned and hit H on its own to hide it. Under here we've got some problems, so I'm going to select these vertices, drag select them all. I'm going to use D, move the pivot up here again. I should have really done this before. Hit D again, move these to over there to fix them, and do H on that one to hide it. We're now to the back of our phone, which is still not quite lined up properly, so go to vertex mode, drag select everything on this right hand side of the phone, hit D, move the pivot up to the top corner where I'm working, hit D again, zoom in, and move these carefully to the right. It's all neatly aligned like that. And I can now unhide everything by finding the grey ones in here and doing Shift H, Shift H. And if your phone's gone black for some reason, you might have accidentally hidden the sky dome in the background as well. So you can do Shift H to bring that back if everything goes black. I'm also quickly going to fix this phone screen so that when I hit 3, the mesh looks less like Lady Cassandra O'Brien from Doctor Who and more like a professional model. To do this, I will delete the face in the middle. I'll double click on the inside edges, deselect the one at the top, the one at the bottom, and hit bridge. And now when I hit 3, it looks a lot better, and we're done.